My name is Rabbi Lila Haas, and I'm the Director of Adult Learning and Growth for the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education. I am thrilled to be moderating a conversation today and joined by producer-director Christian Bruun, writer-producer Natalie Nudell, and associate producer and film talent Mary Myers Hackley from the movie Calendar Girl, which is premiering at this year's film festival. Thank you all so much for joining us. And it's thrilling to see you all here and to be able to talk today about such an amazing woman who I have to say, didn't know very much about her, not being in the fashion industry, but now she's like one of my sheroes. So I am just thrilled to be able to have this conversation with you. Christian, tell us a little bit about how we got to this point in how you discovered Ruth, and maybe this is also for you and Natalie, how you discovered Ruth and how you brought her story to the screen for all of us to be able to enjoy and learn more about.
Of course. Well, thank you so much for having us here. I'm actually was the last one to the party in so many ways. Of course, Mary had worked with Ruth for years, and Natalie has done research and knew Ruth, but we happen to have a friend in common who brought Ruth to my attention. And there's that famous morning I went to meet with Ruth and have coffee with her that turned into like a many hour, just wonderful conversation and just hearing her stories. And I think after that, we both decided that this was going to be a fun journey, and we both wanted to get it started as soon as possible. And we started filming at a very sort of critical point in Ruth's career when she was selling her life's work to the CFDA, and she was going to let go of it. She was closing the office. It was sort of, it was sad, but it was exciting. But we happened to be at a very, very crucial, special moment in time. But yeah, Mary and Natalie knew Ruth way before me, so you should hear from them.
Natalie, tell us a little bit about what brought you to this to this moment of being able to put together this film and being able to share the story on a much bigger scale.
Absolutely. I do have to say it's definitely a story of kismet in the sense that all of so many different interesting things came together to tie up in one. I'm a fashion and textile historian, and when I was in graduate school, I worked on an exhibition on New York Fashion Week, and I had come across a Wall Street Journal article about Ruth in my Facebook feed, and I thought, oh wow, I knew someone must be doing this. I didn't know there was an actual person doing this, and I sort of like filed it in my brain. And a few months later, when we had decided to do this exhibition, which was called Runway Moments New York Fashion Week, I thought to myself, what better item or object to include in this exhibition than the calendars, which hold all moments during New York Fashion Week. And so I tried to get in touch with Ruth's office. She was still running the calendar at that point, and it happened to be during Fashion Week, and so I couldn't get through. And I tried so many times, and it actually happened to be Mary who I got through to. I emailed Mary and explained what we were doing. She then related to Ruth, and Ruth very generously lent us one calendar from each decade, and both Mary and Ruth came and spoke at our symposium. And my professor in the class, Tracy Yoshimura, who's also a producer on the film, her good friend also had some sort of family friend with Ruth. It was this big, complicated circle. And our executive producer, Kate Del Pizzo, had the idea she was very inspired by Ruth. She had come to our symposium, seen the exhibition, and said that, why don't we do a movie on her? And she roped in Christian and sort of pulled everyone together, and they roped me in, and that's really how it began.
So Mary, you have, and throughout the film, your relationship with Ruth unfolds in such a beautiful way. It's a wonderful story. And I'm curious, when you received this email about telling Ruth's story through film, what did that mean to you? And what was her reaction just between the two of you outside of everybody else?
Well, I think she was just more concerned about what that entailed. I think she was happy to have, well, it was a good distraction actually, because it did happen at the same time that the business was being sold, which was a very stressful time. And this was something wonderful going on and kind of preserving everything. She just, I don't think she wanted anything to interfere with her busy schedule. And her things, she liked to go out and do things with her friends or different groups and everything. It was fine.
Yeah. I read that, when you, Mary, were getting ready to, we're looking, I guess, for a position or for a job in New York, and the ad said must like cats. and then you show up and you meet Ruth. Sort of just tell us a little bit about what that beginning of your journey into this fashion world meant to you. And also, what are some of the lessons that you took away from your experience with her?
So many. But yes, the ad, at the time, there were 2 cats living in the office. So I think you had to like them because they did jump on your desk, and it was fine for me because I grew up in a house, we got dogs, cats, it was fine. And plus I was within walking distance from my apartment, which was perfect. And I think Ruth liked that too, because then I could come help take care of the cats on the weekends. Everybody would switch off feeding duties and stuff. But it was really wonderful, that first meeting. Of course, there's that grandmothery type quality that Ruth has. And I was always very close with my grandmother. And so that was easy. I was like, oh, well, this is going to be someone that I want to please and want to work for. And it was. She was wonderful. We talked about last night. She never raised her voice, like very, I don't know, just such a good role model, and taught me so many things, from something as simple as how to take my tea with no sugar, which really, that's a big deal. If you drink your tea every day with sugar for your whole life, then now I like it. It's fine without sugar. Just something as simple as that, to just how to, be a good person and philanthropic and well-rounded and keeping busy and active no matter what. She's just such a positive person. I couldn't have had a better mentor. So yeah.
I think if I can just, I'm just inspired by what Mary said, but there was something about Ruth, I think her presence, right, that sort of, that blew you away when you got to know her, that she was just there, and she was sort of unassuming in some sense, but she was also, you just knew she was like a gravitational force that the whole fashion world sort of spun around, so yeah, being in her presence was just a very unique thing. And she would always, speaking of scheduling, she would call me for every shoot we did, for everything that we were doing. She would always call me in advance and like remind me of the schedules and when to do what and when to show up. And I was like, great, Ruth, we got it. But yeah, she was just a living calendar with millions of logistical things in her head at any given time. So anyway, she was great.
Yeah, I was blown away by, you think about the fashion industry, and you tell this so beautifully throughout the film, but you think about just the magnitude of the fashion industry and these larger than life designers and what they're doing. And then you sort of peel back all of these layers, and there's this little woman who's small in stature, but like you just said, a real force. And what I was really struck by was how so many of these designers talked about how they remember that first phone call that they had with Ruth, and that it was that personal connection, that relationship that then helped them find the strength and the confidence, and getting their show on that calendar was an incredible deal. And they remember that. And I'd like, if you could sort of unpack that a little bit more, what that really means when we think about these large industries, but the is that it really is a personal connection, that mentor, that person that can really help lead the way and open new doors, and what that means for each person.
Natalie, do you want to?
Sure. So the calendar, as we explain, and the film, is really this pivotal logistical tool that is used by all members of the industry to navigate this behemoth world that is constantly changing, and is very much based on time. And as we explore in the film, Ruth had a very interesting position in that she wanted to make sure that the calendar was impartial and that she gave opportunities to emerging designers. And because the format of the calendar is essentially temporal, it is just a minute by minute account of what's happening, this enabled designers, emerging designers, people throwing events to be able to be listed among very established people within an industry, within the industry, creative or fashion or artistic in New York City. And as you were saying, Rabbi, the idea of even getting on the calendar means you're able to participate in that community. And that's why the calendar is so important, because it's a reflection of that community, but it's also an entry point into that community. And Ruth being the, you know, the arbiter of it, this very human, very supportive person, saw the benefit of keeping that a very elastic, open thing. And I think the development of American fashion from her time until now is very much a reflection of that.
You know, I think even stepping out of from the fashion world, you know, we just, as we're recording this and as we're having this conversation, we just recognized International Women's Day. And as I was preparing for today, I thought, you know, this is a woman who was so ahead of her time and truly a trailblazer in the sense of, you know, a divorcee and then a widow and raising her 3 boys and going to work and working from home. I mean, sort of in this whole universe of this pandemic now, what that means to juggle work and home and your family and also being a career woman and being passionate about all of these different avenues. It just seemed so relevant to having that discussion. And I wonder, Mary, if you could sort of bring to life for us, even just the, you know, what it was like to see her. I know you saw her much later in her career, but I can imagine conversations that you had together where she was sort of reflecting on what that meant to be a working woman and raising a family and, you know, being really ahead of her time.
She was, and she would share stories that she even shared in the documentary, you know, about her first marriage and her second husband and family. Family was everything. Came first for Ruth, and the grandchildren, her children, and their wives. Everybody was really close, and she spent lots of time with them. But you know, I just with work and everything, you know, she just stayed focused and she loved what she did. She truly loves people. And that was the key thing, I think, that kept her so successful for so long, was her genuine love for people and wanting to help them. You know, Ruth, God, so many things she taught me. Just like anytime we would hear of a job opening somewhere, we would remember to tell this person. People would call the office. It's like, you know, it was constantly trying to make the connections and help people out, even if they had nothing to do with fashion calendar. Oh, well, we heard about this. So I learned so many things from her. I don't know. It's like all the thoughts and memories come at once. And I don't know, maybe repeat your question again.
I think that's true. You can tell that not just was her relationship with others, but you could see the deep bond that the two of you created. And you could see that ethos, that essence of her, of being a real connector and relationship builder was so beautifully demonstrated in what she believed in. Christian, share with us a little bit, some anecdotes or things that you discovered along the journey of shooting the film that particularly stand out for you, that made such an impression.
We're going to need many hours if I'm going to do that. But I think that one of the things that that came to mind now is the idea that Ruth, you know, that she just kept her love for fashion, right? There's something about the scale and perspective on her business and her personal life that, like, all the way up, way into her 90s, right? She would go with Mary to every show in Fashion Week, and she just really loved fashion. So there's something about that idea of like, don't meet your heroes, or don't, like, get involved with things that you or business you love. In that sense, you'll see the behind the scenes, and it'll change your picture of it. But I don't think it did for her. She just loved it and loved it and loved it, and just wanted to go see every show there was. That to me was super inspiring. And then to think that she's done it for like 70 plus years, never losing steam. And that of course brings up the other side of it, which is like the idea of legacy, right? That she created something. She was a trailblazer, like you said, and I love the word that somebody said, she was a disruptor, because you always think of tech people, and then you have Ruth, and she was a disruptor in a time. And the fact that she kept that going, and then she built something that finally at some point outgrew her, right? The technology in some ways outgrew her, or at least the perception was that technology could replace what she was doing. Now, what then happened is, of course, it turns out that you do need somebody at the center. You need a person, you need a human being. I think what made Ruth, Mary, and The Office so great was that there was somebody there to pick up the phone and keep that personal touch. So I think it feels that it's like Mary said, it was all about the business, but it was really all about the people and the personal connection from day one all the way through the end. Is at least what I came to witness and discover.
Yeah. Natalie, when you received those first copies of the calendar, what as a someone for whom this is your life work too, this research and history and telling story, what did that feel like to you, and what excited you the most about holding these calendars?
Well, so much about it. First of all, the calendars are one of these really amazing types of resources that essentially are ephemera, right? It's meant to be thrown out. It's not useful as soon as the day, it lists passes. But when I first saw them, I was just very excited to go through them. And I discovered what an unbelievable resource this would be. And, Ruth's archive spans the entirety of her career. And so there's 55,000 plain text pages of the history of American Fashion Week listed. And so through listings, and it's, the most granular, most consistent picture of what was happening, not only in New York City, in America, and globally. And it's really just a gift. It's a gift to our field. And what's so amazing about Ruth is that she truly believed and knew how important it was. I think so many people, they may make important contributions, but at the end of their life or whatever, for some reason, they don't believe it was important enough or something like that. And I think Ruth knew exactly how important her archive was, and she made sure that it was preserved correctly. It's currently housed at Special Collections and College Archives at the museum at FIT, the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York City, which is one of the foremost archives for American fashion history. And so what's amazing is that the archives and collections of so many people who are in the calendar live among this archive now. So it's truly an amazing contribution. Not only was her contribution in her life so significant, but even posthumously, this contribution is really just going to live on.
You mentioned the word legacy, Christian, and Natalie, you touched on it as well. And, there's this notion of how we live our lives, whether we live our lives by by our resume. I mean, David Brooks writes this: if you write, you live your life by your resume, or you live your life by your eulogy. And what does that mean? What will people say about you once you are gone? And is that, what are the most important things of how you want to carry yourself, and the importance of passing that legacy on? And I know that throughout the film, Ruth talked a lot about how she wanted this to be a family business. That's a part with it because it's so important to her. And And ultimately, we open the film by watching those boxes and putting everything, getting everything packed up. And it made me think about, what does that mean as we live our lives? And when Ruth was in the midst of this and creating the calendar, and was she wasn't necessarily thinking about Natalie discovering these calendars X amount of years later. She really was in the moment. She was focused on creating something that would be important and useful for her industry. But as you get to experience her throughout the film, you realize that she is imparting incredible messages and meaning to everyone that she comes in contact with, of how you should live your life and how people can speak about you once you're gone. And so I didn't know if you wanted to reflect a little bit about what that meant, just from the words that were on the page are one thing, but the relationships and the care and the sincerity that she, and the tenacity of which she lived her life, really does speak off the page much more strongly. And I don't know if you wanted to reflect on any of that as you experienced her throughout this journey.
Well, I'm going to just do a quick one, because I think the amazing thing is that following Ruth around and filming her and going to all these events with her and just seeing the world that she was interacting with and within. And it's a fashion industry, right? So it's a very competitive, very hardcore business and industry. It's very tough. Yet everybody loved Ruth. Like, I've never come across anybody who didn't immediately sign up to be interviewed or be in the film or go to Fashion Week, and everybody knew her, like security guards and everybody just, there's Ruth. She was like this fixture. So just on that very direct, impression of her, like everybody loved her, really. But Mary, you know her much longer.
Yeah, I was just thinking of the security guards. Yeah, they kept an eye out for Ruth. Well, there was one year there was a rush to get into a show, and like people saw almost a stampede. I got pushed down to the floor, and the security guards came and saved Ruth and brought her. And I think my hair was caught in somebody's flip phone, and I'm like down on the floor, and it was like so bad. But yeah, she's just a sweet person, I don't know what else I can add as far as her legacy goes, but yeah, I just loved looking at the old calendars and just seeing the type of events, the graphic design. It is one of my favorite things to do. And I think when he went into the basement, when the guys came, I had never seen some of those covers, and I was like, wow, look at those. There's some that are black and red, and it was just fun and amazing to have as a reference. In fact, I look forward to seeing them at FIT. I have to come to New York and see it all again.
Absolutely.
So
for me, my experience with Ruth was, I was so lucky to get to meet her, that we developed such a wonderful relationship as a result of doing the film, and Ruth and I were super close, until she passed away. And I just feel so grateful and so lucky to have known her as a friend. But more than that, as a historian and as an academic, very rarely does someone, who's focused on someone's legacy or history, get to actually talk to them. And so it was really amazing to be able to go through the calendars and do research and have questions, and then go back to Ruth and ask her. And then also, it's very also, it brings in questions also of narratives and memory and all of these things that complicate, how we look at history and study history. But more than anything, that was definitely a relationship in my life that truly, pivoted my life in a very positive way. And I'm grateful for it.
I'm interested sort of in the after, sort of the afterward of, we see that the calendar has been transition. There's this transition from how Ruth carried it on, and now that it's electronic, it's virtual, there's it's in somebody else's hands. Tell us sort of now, what does the calendar hold the same weight? Does it still resonate, or was it, what's sort of happening now in this aftermath of it being Ruth's love and home and personal phone call? What is it like now?
So much happened since Ruth sold her calendar. And the reality is, and it's such an interesting question, because today, like literally 2 weeks ago, the calendar is still being changed and discussed and reoriented and new approaches. Historically, these fashion calendars are very important because fashion is a seasonal industry, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of the supply chain of that industry is based on these calendars. And then even more importantly for fashion, excuse me, fashion presentations or fashion week, being listed on the calendar is essentially what's allowing your designs to go from, back of house to the public sphere. So when Ruth sold the calendar, it was acquired by the CFDA, the Council of Fashion Designers of America, which is, the most important trade association for American design. And so Ruth, I know, felt the CFDA was a very appropriate organization to take over. But part of the CFDA's initial desire to wrap its arms around the calendar, as Stan Herman describes in the film, is that in the last 10 to 15 years, especially once New York Fashion Week was organized, the democratic nature of New York fashion enabled it to really, grow substantially. And Mary has spoken about this before, how it was really like, 80, 90 shows to 300 or 400 shows. And it really ballooned. And so the CFDA initially set up, guidelines for participation. They became gatekeepers of this calendar. But Ruth's calendar was not only for Fashion Week, it was for fashion events, charity events, all kinds of artistic and creative events year round, and not only in New York. And so many different groups of people lost this centralizing calendar that they had previously used. The CFDA continued to maintain that Fashion Week schedule, but because there are numerous organizations that run Fashion Week, over time this calendar became fragmented. Mm-hmm. And now with the pandemic and virtual shows and the fact that nobody's actually going anywhere, and you don't need a scheduled time, because if a show is virtual, does it matter what time it's on the schedule? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so what's interesting about it is the CFDA just 2 weeks ago, now helmed by Tom Ford, announced that they're renaming their calendar American Designer Collections. And it's going to reflect all American design in America, but also around the world year round, which is actually much more the approach that Ruth had previously taken. And so it's very interesting that we sort of have this turnaround, because also Eleanor Lambert, who started Press Week initially, her fashion shows in the 70s were called American Designer Showings. So it's a very, fashion is constantly just like repeating itself over and over again. And we see this here as well. And so that's really where the calendar is now. And I know that in Europe, in those calendars, the calendar is very much on the tip of everybody's tongue, because this pandemic and the disruption to the global fashion system is like, nothing like this has happened to the fashion industry since World War II.
It's fascinating story. So I love, one of the things that I had read was that the calendar was known as the Pink Bible. And as a rabbi, we know the centrality of the Bible and of the Torah in telling a story and telling a people's narrative, and how that story is passed down l'dor from generation to generation. And so if you, Christian, Natalie, had to, and Mary, tell this story and pass it on, what will the next generation know about, what do you want them to know about Ruth? What is that l'dor moment for you? What is something that you think that sort of sits in your heart that you want that next generation to know about her?
To me, I think the takeaway and the importance of what we ended up focusing the film on is the idea of how to live a good life, right? The balance, the work-life balance that she was so incredibly good at, but also think the scale of it. And I think there may be a shift in terms of also how people work, right? She worked from home a lot of the time, for many years. The scale of it was small, but it was incredibly important. So I just think there's something about that you can be very, very successful, you can be very influential, you can be kind, you can be loved, and you can run a business and still do it without having to have a $100 billion company and corner the market for everything around the world. Like there's something very beautiful and personal and human about that. That's sort of my takeaway.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Natalie?
Mary, go for it. No? Well, I was just
Go
going to say
first.
Ruth always walked on the sunny side of the street, even maybe like to her detriment in the sense that like maybe some things should have been addressed. But I think that she just had such a wonderful, positive attitude and such, you know, a wonderful personality. And I think that everything she's done in her life, her legacy, her singularity, her compassion, her thoughtfulness, all of this sort of is rooted in her determination. You know, she definitely, even till her last day, was determined. So that's what made Ruth so special.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Her strength. And she was also a very good conversation starter. I always admired that skill. She could sit down with anyone and have them talking like just instantly, and very engaging. Yeah. Golf, and she never complained about things. She just kept going. You know, she'd rub her knee and I know it would be bothering her and she wouldn't say anything. Oh, no, it's fine. It's fine. It's just amazing. So
Beautiful. So I hope what we can all learn from Ruth is that notion, I think, of balance. Like you said, balance, the idea of we don't always have to think huge. It's really that one small step that can really propel us forward. This notion of determination and of generosity and kindness and strength. And we're so grateful for you for sharing this story with us, and just in its beautiful and it's intimate, and it's a true reflection of what it means to have a personal connection with people around you through authenticity and through your own voice. And we're just, thank you so much for sharing her with us and for telling her story in such a beautiful way.
Thank you. I actually have something to add if we have the time.
Of course,
I
please.
would have, as you know, this is the Miami Jewish Festival, and Ruth was, you know, a Jewish woman. And throughout the film and conversations with her, we didn't have a chance to really address it in the film. And I thought that this would have been a good opportunity to briefly address, you know,
Please.
Ruth's, Jewish heritage and background, and how that played into it. And I think a really great example to start with is her name is an immediate reflection of the environment of the 1920s and 1930s in America. And I think Ruth's fact that she always played down her Judaism, although she lived in New York, so it's like sort of hard to do. The fact that she played it down was part of this 1920s, 1930s push for assimilation. And so Ruth's father had immigrated from Russia, from the Pale of Settlement through Odessa at 14 years old during the early 20th century to New England, and put himself through dental school, set up in Haverhill, Massachusetts. Ruth's mom was born to a Jewish family in New York City, and their original last name is Finberg. And when her older brother wanted to join the Navy, I guess in the late 30s, at that time, the Navy was not accepting Jewish applicants. And so he changed his family name to Finbury. And when Ruth moved to New York, she considered changing her last name to Finbury as well. But when she had spoken to a few people about her plan, they told her that Finbury was too long of a name, too many syllables for a job that would be on the phone. And then, so she chose Finley. And she's the only person in her whole family to have that name, because she's, you know, her three sons have their father's last name. And so this itself is a very interesting example and reflection of Ruth's Jewish experience, and, you know, especially, and working in an industry which for a very long period in the 20th century was dominated by Jewish immigrants.
I'm thrilled that you brought it up. At first, because it's not so spoken about in the film, I wasn't, you don't necessarily know what if this was a topic that she would have wanted to explore or not. So I'm so happy that you brought it to our attention, because the concept of Jews in the in the schmata business and in the fashion businesses is such a important and relevant part of the history of the American Jewish experience. And also, I think too, her commitment to family is also something that we
Very much.
that from a Jewish perspective is just so important in the sense of defining who you are and how you see yourself in the world. So if we could just for just a few moments, I think this idea, because so many of the people in the fashion world today and designers are Jewish. Was that something that she talked about with them, or was there sort of this just underlying, we have this connection, this heritage connection, this faith tradition connection, and we know it's there, and that's what it is? Or did Judaism play another role in her life that we just might not have seen in this film?
Well, I think Mary could definitely speak to that. From my experience, as much as she identified as a Jewish person, and all of her children are, identify as Jewish, she was not a very religious person. I never really heard her speaking about God per se, although she definitely identified as someone who is Jewish and, living in New York for that long, very much in the community. She definitely identified with the community. But I personally, Ruth never spoke to me about religion in a very religious or spiritual type of way. It was more of a community type of way, but I think maybe Mary could also speak to that.
Well, she would have friends that she would spend holidays with. If, the family wasn't around for a specific holiday, she would go to dinners and things like that. And sometimes I would attend with her, but no, I think Natalie's right. It wasn't something that was at the forefront that she spoke about a lot.
Well, it's interesting because her name Ruth, you mentioned her last name, but her name, Ruth is a central figure in Jewish tradition, and known as sort of the first person who converts, first Jewish convert to Judaism. Meaning, what I find fascinating about her name is that Ruth was determined and had a inner strength that in the face of incredible adversity, and also was a trailblazer in her own right, when she, from the Bible's perspective, of when she is told that there is nothing here for her, that she's lost her husband and life is going to be challenging for her. She basically says, I'm not going to allow that fate to be my own fate, and forges ahead and creates an entire life for herself, driven by her own inner strength and conviction. And we know from her comes the lineage of King David. And so with Ruth, it's just a very interesting connector piece of her inner strength, her conviction, her determination, as you said, to be positive, to have an outlook that is of strength and courage, and to make a name for herself, not just within her workspace, but also her life, her family, and then a legacy that will live on much longer than she has. So thank you so much, Natalie, for bringing that piece here. And we're thrilled to have been able to sort of open that piece of her that we didn't get to experience in the film.
Absolutely. I'm thrilled to share it.
Great. Wonderful. Any other sort of last thoughts or stories you'd like to share with our viewers?
Well, I was just reflecting on what you just talked about, and I do remember that her house was often, when we were trying to schedule filming, there was family was just always around and was always coming by, and a lot of times when we had to sort of clean up a little bit, because there were always hundreds and hundreds of cards, birthday cards and greeting cards and balloons, and it was always, you just knew that there was a lot going on there, and there was a lot of people coming through, and the family was there. So there was all that. I just remember having to move the balloons away often when we showed up.
Well, she would celebrate her birthday for the entire month.
Right.
So, and we would decorate, really, Ruth taught me that. We never celebrated birthdays like that in my family, and it made you feel so special, because every year, everyone who had a birthday in the office, you got a cake, The door was decorated. She just knew how to make people feel really special. And and she would keep the cards up. Oh, and she'd look at them all the time, and it would make her smile.
Anyone who could document that for a 70-year career and can save birthday cards, I mean, she really was a living, breathing archive, and that's
Totally.
it's even something for us. I thought a lot about while watching the film was because things have changed so dramatically. We have, our pictures are on our phones and everything is digital, and you miss sort of that, like, going through all the cards. And so it made me think about, like, what are some ways that we can translate, saving our precious cards and pieces of who we are in a way that, what will we be doing and, passing on to our children? Will we be able to weed through all of these precious elements that tell such a story that we might not have known because we hadn't physically lived it? And so it makes you think about what are the things that we can do to pass on our own legacy and our own stories, just as you have done so beautifully with Ruth's story. So thank you all. Thank you so much. I'm really thrilled. Thank you to Christian, to Natalie, and Mary from the movie Calendar Girl for joining us. And once again, thank you to all of our members, our sponsors, community partners, volunteers, and all of you film lovers, and especially SAGE, Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education, and the Greater Miami Jewish Federation for their continued support. And thank you, our audience, for participating in the 24th Annual Miami Jewish Film Festival.